Great.
Okay. Hello, all. Hope that you are enjoying the holiday week or holiday month, as it may be, and hopefully everybody is celebrating safely and so forth. Jules and I are really excited to feature Lawrence Welsh. It's his second KAKTUS appearance and the book launch for American Skull that was just published recently by Poetry Playhouse Publications. And as Jules will put the link for that in the chat. We will be, of course, the last KAKTUS of the year. It starts up again in the last Tuesday of January with poets George Drew and Carolyn Wright. So stay tuned for that. Lawrence, I first met Lawrence a few years ago up in Santa Fe. He was there for, along with Eamon Wall, who's in the audience, and several other friends, was there for an Irish American Association, National Association reading at Teatro Paraguas. And so we got to meet there and other trips that he's had up from El Paso to the Albuquerque area. And Lawrence was raised in South Central Los Angeles, put himself through school, has been a journalist, an award-winning journalist, and now is a creative writing professor at the University of Texas at El Paso. He's published 13 books of poetry. We're pleased that American Skull is the newest of those. And I think somebody needs to mute. Okay, I also wanted to mention the book Begging for Vultures, New and Selected Poems, 1994 to 2009 from the University of New Mexico Press, which won the New Mexico-Arizona Book Award and was a finalist for several other prizes. And also his collaboration in 2015 with John Macker, Blood in the Mix. And in 2018, UNM Press, an amazing book, Cutting the Wire, Photographs and Poetry from the U.S. Mexico Border, a collaboration with the poet Ray Gonzalez and the artist photographer Bruce Berman, which was the book named a Southwest Book of the Year award. So we're much looking forward to hearing from Lawrence. He's going to begin with a short reading, and then we'll have a little bit of a conversation to finish out the first hour. Then we'll be going into the open mic as we usually do. So anyway, very warm welcome to Lawrence Welsh.
Thanks, John. And I want to thank Jules Nyquist and John Roach for publishing American Skull. It's certainly a highlight of my writing life, and I'm so glad you're all here tonight. And I want to wish you a happy new year. And thanks for being here. So I'm going to read some poems, mainly from American Skull, and maybe throw in a few other things. But anyway, let's get started. This first poem is called El Paso #1. Forget the 67 Coupe de Ville that's chopped and lowered, and La Solita groceries with the always and forever rusted Coca-Cola signs, and give way to the Nevada Arms to hold and rent daily, weekly, monthly, with its efficiency logo. Somewhere there's Arizona Avenue and its reverberation of trains and trains, like the Rio Grande Burlington Northern Express that turns to St. Vrain, and the loves we left behind, or love for a town in space neglected, but burning with essence. Like, what is the mystery? What keeps me so glued to the line, so hopeful to stay with this border town rush, with the palette of these enduring and disappearing years, with the memories of a place now known as home? Show me what you got. In the annals of stone, stone becomes blood and scar tissue to turn to another round as reprieve for the refs to determine all fate, like a going on for a simple standing, like raising fists, like the hook and jab, like, look at me, Ma, I'm almost dying, yet spitting and dancing too. Thunderbird at 2 p.m. Windows become prisms for blood red pursuits that fade, twist around, disappear and appear again to say, only illusion and hallucination, only the death sound of burning sage, mesquite, and one flaming yucca will retrieve a mourning ground. For image, like the crack of ice cold beers, the moniker of serve cold over ice, and then freeze it, still it, until it melts again, flies off, and becomes our minds, our lives, our earned and lost pedigrees. After White Freightliner Blues, after Townes Van Zandt. Only Houston for the pit, we become. Only Houston for the bio, we become. Only Houston for the masquerade, for the ice house, for the devil's claw, for the hitchhiker's in, for out, for belief in the push, belief in the touch of the swamp, of Southern to give, and given again to only Houston. Only Houston, we become what's rolling and what's rolling again. American Skull. After amnesia, all I remember is bone, and then again, not even that. Only the feel with blind hands of a going on, or into holes of darkness, even in a desert of constant brightness. Some say he's discovered his new path that dissolves, but thankfully slowly, one that takes years, unless tossed and crushed, thrown about and shook like a million pieces of remaining light. The Vallejo Ring. For Cesar Vallejo and for Clayton Eshelman, the Vallejo Ring. I have taken off the Vallejo Ring and thrown it in the desert. It sleeps with antler and sage. It sings with mesquite and misguided cholla. It will never be found except in words, but they trick and lie. They know shadows and conceits. They're pretentious, like failed Hollywood actors. They want to be somewhere else, not El Paso or Tornillo, not Fabens or Clint. They want something big, like Aztec or Maya, something with flash, like gold and diamonds, something like the New York Times. Something with escape and rescue, not missing, but the words never work here. And not when you can't find them. They've disappeared like his ring, further down with kingfisher bones and owl eyes, further down each week and year until recovery is slimmer than AA's promise, slimmer than the truth of the rising, slimmer than the sized retrospects felt fitting every finger. Maybe the memory brings it back, the shimmer on bone, the doors of Benny's pawn shop, the magnifying glass and the words $38.95. I know it's worth more, but $38.95 is my final offer. See, around here, no one needs it. They need bush and simple foods like rice and beans and well-salted pork. It's beautiful, but beauty only goes so far. It goes to just under $40. I have taken off the Vallejo ring and thrown it in the desert. It wasn't worth very much, or maybe it was worth everything. Imaginary blood ocean. On the backdrop, one remembers the rights off the jetty and lefts. On the other side, for true surfers, can own themselves or a way to become one with the water, or knives, or pistols, or angel dust, or malt liquor. They take it in and take on another's wish of some peace, but never inland. Some remember or complain about Inglewood, Hawthorne, Lenox, Inglewood. Not close enough, not becoming the source, not really the real things, but a way that paints the directions that offer the real thing in, or another way home, another way back to say, I will leave one day, but let the salt and let the reddened breaks become my mind in a complete energy to learn and memorize for those other lives now gone from the ocean's floor. A prayer for 21 years of sobriety. As failure turns to a little self-esteem, let it endure in some hope, like a passing of suns or a glimpse of light that leads one on now only to hear. One moment to tell, or another specialized in the belief. What we received is grace, some call fire, to try a new way and to keep moving on with the realization such beauty is given freely with years so difficult to earn. A short story for the great Irish writer Frank O'Connor. Actually, it's called A Short History for Frank O'Connor. To know my mother is to know Ireland. For my dead mother is Nancy Ann Hogan Welsh of Coolahalaga of Tipperary. And to know her is to sing the Rocks of Bawn and Billy in the Low Ground, and to recite the Lake Isle of Innisfree. Yet she wanted a businessman for a son, someone rich, she said, like the Kennedys. Oh, mother, I am beyond that now. My pitiful words like tin for a cobbler's hand, like leather cracked and dried in the desert, like a hidden Munster flag saying United Irish League with a wolfhound and harp, and nowhere new to go, but to the stars and turf, where we will meet again and dance and sing a lost or eternal tune, one perhaps in Irish or Gaelic, one hammered maybe or remembered in the morning dew. The horror at Skibbereen. Skeletons aren't really still alive or moaning in a corner for the fever or the rats with something good to eat, like humans or Irish, perhaps curled up on the floor. So let us become locals at Kinsale or the Road Inn and remember a relative or a Cork man and Cork woman abandoned in Ohio or orphaned in San Francisco. Not even burials can silence them, or perhaps a tombstone that never comes. Just our relatives, our cousins, our mothers and fathers in forgotten cairns and remembered graves. Hill. What could we own for the fighting's edge? Barley, a field, a chalice, the rusted scythes to take their heads. And we died there too, after a sup, some said, or the elixir of taste to drive us on, and then a mishap or mispronouncement or promise. The bones as fodder, our flesh as nourishment for a remembering ground. The broken Hennessy bottle. Let obsessions with a teetotaler's fate remain stranded in the image, or shining like diamonds and emeralds for a drinker's hand. But what of the drunkard or alcoholic? Perhaps the lifting and toss, the flying now through this paradise of air, the simple smash on an endless beach or priceless desert stones, with a thirst to come or a thirst finally, no more. The old jail, Sisters of Mercy, Neenah County, Tipperary. To speak Irish is blackened stone now that turns to rusted skeleton keys for spinning round as if I could taste the rain that gets me here and see their empty ink bottles full with their golden nibs, remembering the why of it all, and the new but forgotten catechism that's remembered in this sanctity of another's place. This is from my daughter, Megan McNeil Welsh, and this is called After Pat Toohey's Reel, for Megan McNeil Welsh. A summer's place is forgotten, or some allusion to what one became. A crossing perhaps from Tipperary to Cork to Liverpool and into New York. Oh, you young girl, help bless my mother, your grandmother, with a traveler's song, since she came so far to give and gave all, and now your song for the dead, for all the Irish dead, to put a smile, a remembrance on their faces. And us here so proud that we can stand and hear you play at all in gratitude, as we are in a place of hope for all who made it, and those who never did, and those who knew its improbable score or its probable name and will. Aisling, number 2. Bog. The free word depressing still, or fire still to become a touch 40 years ago, like black stone or stoned somehow in Drummondere with swans of all colors gliding? Or is that swimming when they say Yank and American, while you become still and only mumbling, fumbling for her name and her will? And this is the last poem tonight. And once again, thanks for all of you being here. Thanks to John and Jules. And I want to wish you all a happy new year. This is called A Glass of Porter. For those we never met, but hear the tale of 10 children in a 2-room thatched cottage and a husband, they whisper, with a problem with the drink. But so many had a problem with the drink. And one day he's sent into town, for his first son Cornelius is sick. And in town he ends up at O'Carroll's, and he's supposed to get the doctor, but the doctor isn't found, or is found at O'Carroll's, and the Guinness is found, and the Harp is found, and the Patty is found, and the Jamesons is found, and the Bushmills is found, or Powers is found, and the trip home is forgotten, and the stories, always the stories that are told or never told again. And grandmother, oh Annie, you held Cornelius and waited, and your husband William never made it home. Or the next day when he did, all hung over, the boy, his first son, your first son, was dead. And every cairn, or cairn maker, or single stone carries his name, and I carry his name. As I pray now for you, grandmother, your first son gone by the curse of drink. And the others would learn to drink too, like your other sons and nephews, like me, my brother, and my father, who told me on his deathbed, son, you gave up the drink, you made me proud. Now get your brother to do the same. And this toast is for Annie Hogan of Coolahalaga, of Tipperary, and the black holes of her husband's ashamed eyes, and how she forgave him one day as I forgive, and how she learned to never judge as we should never judge, and how she never turned a stranger away who was hungry, who was lost, who was thirsty, for to give, even if just a potato and a glass of porter is enough. Oh, grandmother, we have so much to learn in this new country, that we hold our lives well, our pledges to make it without the bottle, our obsessions with the bottle, our eventual rising from hell. So let the crows still sing your name as they did throughout Tipperary on your passing. Ah, yes, they said, indeed, Annie Hogan, a saint all right, a spirit now that always gave, a woman now who always gives. Thank you.
You can unmute and give Lawrence some applause that he can hear. Well-deserved applause.
Woo! Bravo. Bravo.
Thank you, Lawrence. I would like to take a few minutes to have a little conversation with Lawrence, and then we'll and with Jules, and then we'll bring some more folks into the conversation via Q&A. So I was going to start with a question. Yeah, here's the book. I was going to start with a question about the desert, but you were concentrating quite a bit tonight on the Irish poems, which are one chapter in American Skull. And so I guess I was wondering a couple of things. One is how important was the Irish identity, Irish American identity in your childhood and in LA? And second, in terms of the book, how do you find the connection between the Irish poems and the sort of Southwestern poems that are there? So, yeah.
The Irish identity thing in Los Angeles was everything, because when I was growing up there, it was brutal in the ghetto I grew up in. The neighborhood had completely changed after the Watts riots, the murder of JFK, and then my sister and father worked the streets for Robert F. Kennedy for president. And when Robert F. Kennedy got murdered, it was a defining thing for my family that really took a lot of air out of our whole experience. And then, I mean, I hate to say this, but we were hated by a lot of people in the neighborhood because we were like the only white family left in South Central Los Angeles. So on the streets, it was this brutal kind of hatred and gang warfare that I went through all the time. And then like on the streets, it'd be like, there's a white boy, let's kill him. So I learned to fight, I learned to box. It's so complicated. We were all trapped down there, and I had great African-American friends and Chicano friends, but it was really fueled with hate and fueled with violence where I grew up. Now, conversely, at home, my mother was an Irish immigrant, and my father was a second-generation Irish American. And so they gave me like tons of love in this Irish American Catholic household. And it's the only reason why I think I'm here today, because the streets were full of hate and violence, and there was some love at home. But my mom used to tell me, I'll wrap up that question, when I was fighting on the streets, and my mom would tell me sometimes, get your ass out there and fight, because you're going to have to fight, whether the guys have knives or sticks or stones or whatever, you're going to have to fight. And then she'd pull me aside and say, Lawrence, you think this is tough? This is nothing compared to Ireland. Your relatives just a generation or so back went through the Great Potato Famine. And she said, this isn't shit. The Great Potato Famine, 1 out of every 3 Irish men and women are buried in unmarked graves. And we had nothing in Ireland. So if you think this is tough, get your ass out there on the streets and fight, because this is nothing compared to Ireland.
I just, a month or 2 back, I interviewed TJ English, who's written a number of books about the Irish gangs, including the Westies and Paddywhack. So a similar kind of story in many cities as well. So then you moved to El Paso, which is a tough town in its own respect, and you're a teacher. And tell me about that a little.
Well, growing up in LA, and TJ English is a very good friend of mine. I love him. And I kind of see him as a mentor, and he's been very kind to me. And we've spent time together. In LA, my whole life was surrounded by a very heavy Mexican, American, and Chicano culture. That's just the facts. I don't lie about these things. So when I came out to El Paso, it kind of felt in a way like home, because it's a big Chicano, Hispanic, it's Dagoberto Gil calls it East LA. And I fell in love with the desert, and God, I met my wife and she grew up here, and El Paso is my home, and I have a deep love for it, and the desert and the border, even though, there are issues here like there are anywhere, but the people here are just incredible, and it's my place.
Yeah. And, the desert's a place that's known, any desert, I guess, by definition is known for scarcity, known for danger, for certain inhospitability. But it's also a place with hidden life, hidden, very, very, very resilient life. And in your poetry, you seem to find that balance, or it seems to me that many times you're finding that hidden resilience within the Southwest and within the desert.
Yeah, it's complete magic. I mean, I came out here with pen and paper, and I spent 5 years I'm trained as a newspaper reporter, and worked on 2 newspapers in LA, and then spent 5 years on 2 college papers, and then spent 5 years as a daily newspaper reporter in the South Bay of Los Angeles. So, you're trained in journalism school to pay attention. And so ever since I got here, wherever I go, I've always had pen and paper, and I'm totally obsessed with the desert. I'm obsessed with El Paso. And for my friends like, John Macker, who's here tonight, and Bruce Hallsapple, and V.B. Price, and all these other great, Todd Moore, who used to be in Albuquerque, all these people in the desert, and a lot of the writers in Santa Fe, they mean so much to me. I'm just a student trying to soak it all up, and trying to, find some essence here. And really the desert is all essence.
Yeah.
I have a question for Lauren. Speaking of the desert and El Paso, and you talked a little bit about your influences, and I wanted to also mention Ray Gonzalez, who is from El Paso, now living in Minneapolis teaching. But how did you have another book that you shared authorship with Ray, the Cutting the Wire, which is University of New Mexico Press, excellent photography. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with Ray? And he blurbed your book on American Skull, but talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, when I first moved to El Paso, like any student, and first and foremost, I'm a student, I started soaking up everything I could about the Southwest. And I was a graduate student at the University of Texas at El Paso. And that's where I first encountered the work of V.B. Price, the great New Mexico writer. But I was discovering all these different people, outlaw poets, really esteemed Southwest writers, everyone. And it was at the University of Texas at El Paso I discovered Ray Gonzalez's work. And he wrote a book called Memory Fever about his early days in El Paso. And then I discovered his poetry, and I was like, and then during that time, I started doing ceremonies in the desert. I started hiking in the desert. I started really all organically taking the desert in. And I found that he wrote about El Paso like no one else, that he had a special affinity for the desert. And what happened is I wrote him a letter, and he found some of my work that I'd written about the desert. And I think it's one of the big things of my life, because he really embraced my work, and he saw my work about El Paso and the desert, and he fell in love with my work. And so that kind of made me feel incredible, because, I'm not from El Paso. I've been there 27 years now, but he kind of gave me like a stamp of approval. Like, this guy is kind of a homeboy, you know what I mean?
Permission.
And then one time I met Ray in Denver, and we started talking, and I sent him a copy of my New Mexico book. And he wrote this gigantic review of it for the Bloomsbury Review. And he told me he loved it. And he was coming to El Paso a few years later, and he said, could I meet with you? And so we met, and I drove him. He wanted to go up to Las Cruces, New Mexico. So I drove him up there, and it was there I had already had my pitch. And we were in the car in Mesilla, New Mexico. And I said, Ray, I've got this great New York Times photographer who has been photographing the border for 50 years. And do you think you would ever be interested in doing a book? And so my heart's beating, and I think I'm going to pass out. And he turned to me and said, Larry, I'd love to. And so I pitched him, and he wanted to do it. And so Ray just, he means a lot to me. And I love him.
Thank you. Yeah, we love
Jules
Ray.
knew him up in Minnesota. So.
I know she did.
He's one of my
Yeah.
mentors, so he's just amazing. And I'm just so happy that we asked him to do a blurb for American Skull, and he said, of course. And a lot. And I'd also like to thank John Macker, Eamon Wall, and Dorothy Alexander, all here tonight.
Yes, all here tonight. They all did wonderful.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, they all mean so much to me. Eamon Wall is one of my heroes from Ireland, and John Macker, who's Irish American. I don't know, I don't want to be too touchy feely, but I love those people.
Mhm.
Feel free to unmute any of the three of you if you want.
Yeah, if anyone
We love
wants
you. We love you,
Um,
Lawrence. We love you. And I knew Ray in Denver back in the 80s.
That's right.
And he was like a kind of a guru in Denver to a lot of us. And then his most recent book I picked up called Field Puma. And that's
yes,
after
that one's
Vallejo.
great.
And, oh,
I
what
have
a book.
like all of Ray's books. Yeah.
What a book. It's just a great book. And I urge everybody to pick it up after they picked up American Skull, pick up Ray Gonzalez's book, Field Puma. It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
But anyway, congratulations, Lawrence. Bravo.
Oh, thanks, John. It's good seeing you, man.
Also, we were talking, John, before the Zoom. Lawrence and Jules and I were talking about the new Cal Robertson book that Lummox Press has published, Gary Brower's Labor of Love, that just came out about a month ago. Ride Easy, and poems of the collected poems of the late Cal Robertson, and John just did a remarkable review of that as well for Poetry Bay. So we're hoping to have some readings around New Mexico for that book. So a lot of great poets. Okay, so we've got a few minutes. I'm just going to open things up for any questions from the audience or comments from the audience before we move on to the open mic.
Feel free to just unmute and say something, or you could type something in the chat and I'll
Yeah,
read it as well.
either way, and
Sure.
Jules can check the chat to see if you choose that way.
John, Jesse here. Lawrence, the poems you read, it sounded like you spent a lot of time in Ireland and that area. Tell us a little bit about your time there. I'd be curious.
Well, thank you. When I was 16, in 1975, I spent most of the summer there on Coolahalaga, my mother's small farm in Tipperary. And my sister was always telling my mom, "You're always telling us that we're Irish, we're Irish, or we're Irish. When the hell are you going to take us to Ireland?" So in 75, I spent most of the summer there. And that was one of the kind of defining times of my life. Ireland was the old Ireland in 1975. It was incredible. And that summer changed my life. But also that summer, I started drinking really heavily. And when I came back to the States for my junior year in high school, I'll just be frank, I kind of became a full-blown alcoholic. And so my junior and senior year was kind of a wash, where I was running the streets and I was partying really hard. So I kind of had to wrestle with those things over my life, being an Irishman. I went back in 1982 and spent time there. And then in 1999, I went back to Ireland again for my honeymoon. And then in 2018 at the University of College Cork in Ireland, they had me as like a part writer in residence. And so the last time I was back there was in Cork, Ireland at the University College Cork. And I took my wife and my 2 young kids. And so I don't know, Ireland means everything to me. It's just, I mean, not everything, but it's so deeply in my DNA. And as much as when I was a young kid in my teenage years, I tried to escape it, and because I felt kind of like heaviness from Ireland, and because I always felt it was like weighing on my shoulders. But over the years, I've been able to come to grips with that, and I've dedicated my life to, just learning all I can and the Irish poets. And I never even wanted to be a poet, but never at all. But it just kind of happened, and that happens to occasionally to Irish people.
It's a
Thank
calling, right, Lawrence? Kind of comes
Lawrence,
right.
Or
when
Irish
did you-
American people, or whatever, bad, you know.
At what
If
point,
there's-
Lawrence, at what point did your kind of identity or your focus kind of shift from journalism to poetry? Was it a direct thing or just a?
Well, when I was 22, I was dating this woman who has gone on to become a significant novelist in Los Angeles. And we were both wanting to be newspaper reporters, and we were both writers and wanting to be writers, however we could be. We had this longing. And I was with her for 4 years, and she was hugely influential in my life, because before then I was a punk and a street guy, and I was the lead singer of the Alcoholics, a punk band in LA. So I didn't start college until I was 23. But it was in that relationship that she saw me gravitating somewhat towards poetry. And there was one night where she brought me home the selected poems of Paul Verlaine from the University of California Press, the French poet. And I started reading Paul Verlaine, and I just started kind of at 22 becoming organically obsessed with poetry.
Thank you.
Right.
May I?
Scott?
Yeah, is it funny to make that point, because I've said for years, I'm not the only one, that sometimes to understand a situation and people, it is valuable to read not just history and journalism, which I don't separate the two actually, but also to read fiction, because it gets into how the people think and feel. And likewise, your poems about Ireland, particularly the poem in which the young man passed, they're bringing it home to us. They're telling us, not just telling us, they're showing us what happened. And it was to say the least, very moving and very, very tragic. It reminds us that we should not dichotomize, because in these days when, I'm sorry, but it seems as if one is not a recognized and officially labeled minority group, then one's suffering doesn't matter. But of course it does matter. That we need to see that this is not what are we going to do about what's happening to this specific group, or that specific group, or any of the, let me be careful here, ideology that is currently in vogue, but how are we going to cope with the day-to-day tragedies that are never going to leave human existence, but that can always be mitigated if we have it in our hearts and our minds to work to make things a little bit better. There's no sweeping solution that's going to make everything better overnight. That's snake oil. But that poem in particular was very moving. It was as much, to me, it was as much history as a textbook.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, and I agree with you.
So time for a couple more questions, if anybody has one or comments.
I have a question.
Hi, go ahead.
Hey, John. Hi, Jules. Thank you, guys. Lawrence, I sure
Yes.
enjoyed listening to your stuff. Living in El Paso, do you get down into Mexico much? And if so, talk to me and us a little bit about your relationship with Mexico.
That's a
Please.
great question. Before the drug wars started, and I was a single man and I wasn't dating anyone, I used to go over to Juarez all the time. And I would salsa dance over there, because in East LA, I learned how to salsa dance and do the cumbia, and I loved to dance. So I would go over there and I would ask the local women to dance. And anytime, and I would read over there. There were Mexican poets who used to invite me over to read at Las Brisas, which was this back alley gutter poet bar. And so anytime I went to Mexico, it is like this: image, 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 image. It's incredible. And then I would come home and I would write all night long. So I dearly love what is. When the drug wars started and all the cartel stuff, I quit going and I let my passport subside. But I recently got it again. I got it renewed when I went to Ireland, and I need to get back. One of the leading boxing journalists by the name of Javier Sanchez writes for El Diario and El Norte, and he used to take me over to the prize fights, and we would sit ringside, and I felt like a king, like I was El Rey, like a jefito, because what would happen is during those nights that he would take me to the fights in Juarez, there wouldn't be one word of English spoken. And I was just ecstatic. And then so for decades now, I've taught a lot of students from Juarez, and I can speak some Spanish. I mean, it's not perfect, but a lot of my students cross the border. And I don't know, I love Mexico. I mean, deeply. I know, you know, and so, you know, and I'm going to get back there again, but, you know, Juarez, and especially for a poet, it's a, you know, and do you guys remember in On the Road, Jack Kerouac has that whole scene where he's with his mother in the cathedral in Juarez. And I hadn't read that chapter in like 25 or 30 years. And I read it a couple of weeks again, and I was like, oh my God, Kerouac gets it. But I mean, we all knew he got it. I mean, for, you know, but Kerouac and Juarez with his mother, you know, it's an incredible place. So I hope I answered your question, and Juarez is heavy.
Claro que sí, señor. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, señor.
And time for maybe one more question before we move on to the open mic. Brett Nelson.
One of the lines that I really loved was in the black holes of her husband's ashamed eyes. Just wanted to say that. That was
Thank
great.
you.
Lawrence does so much with with such compression. It's amazing. Yeah. So many compressed images. Terrific.
Yeah, and you know, thanks for that. And I just want to say, you know, those are my people, and I really love my people, because there's a lot of love there. But you know, when you look at Ireland and you really look at it, I'll just finish up with this too. The music there's the poetry there's love there, but as we know, there's a lot of tragedy there. But maybe there's a lot of tragedy everywhere. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Probably true. Thank you.
There's a lot of tragedy in Mexico and in the United States.
And in Albuquerque. Yeah.
And Española.
Yeah.
Lawrence, I was looking at your poem about the "Show Me What You Got" that you read with the stones. The stone becomes blood and scar tissue. It's on page 9 of the book. And I was thinking of, you know, the solstice and the labyrinth that we have at the Playhouse, and that stones are there, you know, and how you said you're going out there doing rituals with the desert and the stones. So I just thought that was a good way to end, or just to, that, you know, the earth is still always there.
And I got it.
Issues.
Well, yeah, and when you go, just real quickly, when you go to Ireland, all the times I've been there, there's these mounds that are just like with rocks on them, and you'd ask the local, well, what's there? And those are the cairns of the unnamed dead who would just die and be piled one on top of each other. So cairns for me of unmarked graves are, well, they're essential.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're gonna.
I'll stop
we-
recording, but I just
Okay.
want to thank everybody and Lawrence Welsh with American Skull.
Miss
from,
most.
And
Poetry
we can have
Playhouse.
one more round of applause if we could for Lawrence.
All right.
Want to unmute.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. You've made my 2021.